Well, good morning, everyone. Very early start for some people, but I wanted to introduce myself, Jake Upfield. I'm here. I head up the solutions advisory team at Cybit. A bit of background to myself. I've been in managed services and cybersecurity now for coming on about 8 years. Worked obviously at a few, if you look at my LinkedIn, a few mega corporations, a few, #1 providers in the UK, and I found myself at Cybit here now to help build out what that security proposition looks like, but also more into the way we go to market with our services, our technologies, and more importantly, our partners. And one of our core partners moving forward being on the call with me today. So Ronan, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Thank you, Jake. I'm Ronan Lavelle from Validato. So I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO. And as we'll find out a bit later on in today's session, we simulate cyber attacks, particularly things like ransomware, to test defenses and identify where organizations may be exposed to threats.
So the ultimate point of this is we're kicking off a lot of cybersecurity webinars moving forward. There's been some news from our side, from Cybit's side regarding security, but equally it's, you can't escape it anymore. Obviously these attacks such as Scatter Spider, in the retail sector, and more with the move to compliance regulations such as the new Cyber Resilience Act in the supply chain side and the public sector side, but also, realistically, until recently, people like the IPO were, a bit of a wet flannel when it came to actually enforcing these, GDPR fines and things. But over the past couple of years, we've seen it become more and more prevalent that they are taking action. So across today, we're just going to cover off, where Cybit are moving. Some of you might have seen the news that I'm about to talk about, who Validato are, and more importantly, how do you test your cybersecurity posture? Why is that so important? And ultimately, how does that help companies moving forward? And especially, in that mid-market area. So I guess the elephant in the room. Some of you may have seen the news articles regarding that Chiltern divested part of its its practice, and that being the Belfast secure team, the secure SOC that it had. And effectively, this wasn't anything negative towards Cybit, right? Cybit, as a managed services provider, as a solutions provider, did a lot of mid-market style, SMB style, transformations with clients. However, the Cybit, Belfast team was very enterprise focused, and gave cutting edge solutions really, but it was a mismatch of skills. So we've moved away from that, and we've moved more into a idea of partnerships in security, consulting in security, advisory services in security, and ultimately using the technologies that we know day in, day out, and fit our mid-market approach. So moving on, we will, this is the sort of core services that we have, but in that endpoint, that cybersecurity standpoint, you have obviously the endpoint protection, your data security, as obviously we do a lot in the data area, and then more into those business resiliency type things that you would expect, that backup, disaster recovery, etc. GRC obviously is a massive thing to date because of these fines and supply chain attacks coming out. And then furthermore, we package this up into the process of, I guess, assessments, through to obviously defining what the outcome of those assessments are, through to obviously delivery of whether it's technology, consultancy, configuration, or managed services itself, and then more into the assurance stage, right? Is what you're doing fit for purpose, and how do we improve that carrying on? So I guess that's the sort of preamble as to what this is. Now, a good place to start with everyone, and where we would want to start with our clients or clients of new, is test what your issues are, right? But more importantly, test what those issues are in comparison to your vertical, in comparison to the threat landscape that your vertical or your size of business would be part of, and more importantly, test that you are actually safe from the real threats that you may come across, and not just, you know, the threats that might affect a FTSE 50 company, or the threats that might affect, say, construction, but you sit in retail or something like that. So Ronan, I'm going to pass the reins over to you now, if you can be the presenter, and I'll let you do a little background about Validato, and I'll ask some questions as we go.
Thank you, Jake, and thank you, Gia, for giving me the screen.
A bit of housekeeping as well. There is a questions box top right. Those questions are anonymous, but myself and Ronan can see them. So if you do want to participate, or if there's anything you want to cover off, please do just drop that question in.
And actually, when I present this, thanks, Jake, it often invokes a lot of thoughts and questions, so we welcome them. So please do jot them down, and we will answer them at the end. Just very briefly, Validato is one of these rare things, which is a UK-founded cybersecurity company based in Cheltenham. We originally came out of an accelerator program run by the NCSE in Cheltenham, and we have teams in Prague, in the Czech Republic, and in South Africa. And we essentially simulate cyber attacks, but in sort of Gartner parlance, it's called adversarial exposure validation. And we have a very wide range of customers, ranging from small and medium-sized companies to more larger ones, but in also a variety of different sectors. So public sector, defense, law firms, financial services, telecoms, etc. And so this is actually not to dwell too much on Gartner analysis, but this area that we operate in, sort of adversarial exposure validation, forms part of a wider Gartner research area called continuous threat exposure management. And this is one of their sort of big bet areas, about a $28 billion market in the next 5 years. So huge growth potential, but also gaining a lot of traction, particularly in the United States, which will invariably come into Europe very shortly. So our platforms, as Jake mentioned, are here to basically test your defenses against threats. So not to look at any particular point, like say a vulnerability or a detection, but actually look at the whole threat or attacker life cycle in your entire organization. So wherever and however you do business, if a threat actor was to target you, would your network and business go down, for instance? So we are here to basically answer I guess, simple business questions about technical cyber risks and cyber threats. We are ultimately here to try and test whether you are resilient to different threats. And we're particularly interested in your endpoint environments, your servers and your desktops. So be them Windows, Linux, or Mac. And if any of you are in the insurance sector, we're here to basically try and find the exposures to risk, but those are technical risks, but also your people in your organization as well. So are there certain populations of users, maybe those people that open and click and share documents and links and so on as part of their jobs, so people like accounts payable or marketing or sales teams and so on, customer services, may quite often be the initial access sort of exploitation point. So we want to call these out and see where are you exposed, and are there things you can do to better protect yourself, and actually for free. So I wanted to just highlight a couple of things. So there are a couple of active incidents that are in the public domain and media right now. So if you've been looking at the press, I think Jaguar Land Rover's workforce have been told to stay at home pretty much all of this week in the last 10 days, which is hugely disruptive. It's probably already in excess of like £100 million of disruption in terms of that operation. But I'm going to share with you a ransom note. This is quite a cheeky one from a relatively new ransomware threat actor called SafePay. And this is what appeared on the computer monitors of a company that they attacked recently. And so if you can't see this very clearly, but basically it says, hi, you're SafePay. Your IT specialist made a number of mistakes setting up the security of your corporate systems. It was the misconfiguration of your network that allowed our experts to attack you. And they go on and on and on. Just suffice it to say, SafePay, but also a whole lot of other ransomware threat actors are in the Validato platform and available for customers to test their resilience against. But what was interesting about this was that they weren't necessarily talking about a software bug or a patch that was out of date or something. It was actually some of the core functions of Windows and Linux environments that allowed them to very easily compromise their victim environments. And that is what Validator is here to test and then to visualize for you in really simple terms. So we basically are an offensive security testing platform, but we're an automated one, and we're designed for mid-market organizations. So while we do some very sophisticated and complex testing, we have completely simplified it for the customer use. Um, and I guess one of the reasons why we're doing this is because it's really expensive. And when we look at just one attack type, say ransomware, according to IBM, I think in 2024, um, it's £3.5 million on average to recover from a ransomware attack. And I think, as I just alluded, I think Marks and Spencers are probably close to 300 or even £400 million as a result of the attack that they suffered. Co-op, we're not sure about in the public domain yet, but these are very costly events. I work with a lot of IT and security teams all over Europe. One of them was actually a contractor in the defense sector, and they thought they were never going to be attacked. They were a pretty small specialist aerospace subcontractor, and they really didn't think that they would be the targets of any kind of criminality. And when I spoke to their CISO, the head of security, about the attack last year, he pretty much welled up. It was a very emotional event. So not just the financial cost, but the burden that it puts on your staff and your teams, and in some regards, the shame also. So we are here to regularly test, so not like once a year, but more like once a month. Do some stress tests against the key and the most common threats that are in your environment, but also some of the emerging ones as well. So, if you are reading the news about Jaguar Land Rover and you read about Scattered Spider, who are the reported threat actor, and the tools that they use. So they apparently, one of the tools they use is a ransomware as a service platform called Hellcat. There are several others also. So you could use our platform to go, are we okay against Scattered Spider? Are we okay against Hellcat? And get the answer without causing any disruption in about 2 hours' time. So what I'm going to do is
I
I'm
know
just
you're going to
come.
get into this. I know you're going to get into this, Ronan. But I guess for most people on the call here, they've probably either heard of ethical hacking, red teaming exercises, etc. These being the testing your environment through professional services and things like that. Quickly touch on, I guess, what red teaming is, to you guys, and I guess it will show why you deliver this in a different way when you sort of go into that demonstration phase.
Absolutely. So I guess everyone on the call has probably heard of penetration testing. It's almost become the sort of de facto understanding. If I want to test my security, I get an external firm in, or maybe I have an internal team that runs a pen test. Um, Red teaming, I guess, for most organizations, and penetration testing is a very wide um, scope of definition. But for most organizations, penetration testing is what happens after you run things like vulnerability scans, you find some out of date patches that need to be updated, you fix them, and then you think you're okay, so you get an external adjudicator in essentially to validate your patching essentially. And for the most part, pen testers come in and they are trying to identify vulnerabilities in your systems and then try to exploit them. Red teaming is much of the same, but actually goes way further, and where they basically are simulating the adversary, the ransomware threat actor, in some cases a nation state threat actor, or a cyber activist or something that might be there to cause some kind of political damage or something. So these are physical human-based services, really the top of the offensive security testing game. And because of that, they are very costly usually. They're quite complex to plan and to manage. And as a result, you may either never do these if you're a smaller organization, or if you're a larger organization, you can probably only afford to do very few of them unless you're really very regulated and very huge. Um, what Validato does is to bring this capability to the mass market in a nutshell. So we automate not all, but about 80% of traditional red team testing. And what this does is it also allows the red team consultants to massively scale their services also and to focus on really high value use cases, whereas we will pick off and identify some of the, I guess, the lower value, but also the common sense things that maybe your IT and security colleagues over maybe a long period of time may have missed in the configuration of Windows and Linux and Mac environments. So yeah, in a nutshell, that is what red teaming is, and how we complement but also expand the scope of it. Did you have a part B question to that, Jake?
No, I think you've covered it all off, but I think it was yeah. Obviously to do this more frequently means you can show the continuous improvement, but equally check that as you make continuous improvements, you're not opening yourself up in other areas as such. So yeah, I think as we go through the demo, if you can explain why the sort of Validato delivery of the service, if you like, of the technology is a bit different to the, I guess, the scoped engagements, if you like, which are the traditional approach, that'll be handy.
Absolutely. So first up, this is a web or a SaaS-based platform, so it deploys really quickly, and it can be used by anyone on the call today with minimal training, even though we're talking about concepts like threat simulation and offensive security testing. It is a very simple platform to use. It's been designed as such. Um, but it could also be used if any of you work through other intermediaries also. They can provide this for you too. Um, and ultimately what we're looking at here is your internal network and how resilient you are to key threats that your organization faces. So we can see that posture change and what your acceptable risk posture would be over time. So in my little fictitious environment here. We've come from not a very impressive place, and now we look like we're plateauing out into quite a nice area. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to measure resilience, and we see or hear a lot about cyber resilience. And I think we're going to hear more about that later this year and early next year. There's some fairly major new legislation coming in within the UK in the form of the UK Cybersecurity and Resilience Act, which is essentially trying to put some pressure on organizations in critical industries. And some of you may well be part of those industries where you need to increasingly demonstrate your ability to survive digital disruption. So not just cyber attacks, but predominantly cyber attacks on digital infrastructures. So we help that story by trying to report on resilience by looking at how well protected are we against the threats, and how well can we detect and see threat-based activity on our network. Um, and then there are a bunch of KPIs that ultimately if this was in any of your organizations after 3 or 6 months time or something, these should all be green. And I liken this to like the control panel on a if you go into a company reception area and there's the fire alarm panel, and every Friday morning or Thursday morning they run a test of the fire system, which is essentially what we're doing in the cyber world. We're running tests of a cyber attack. We're not actually under attack, and you're not really setting fire to your buildings or creating smoke, but you're simulating that. And ultimately, what the people administering those tests are looking for are green LEDs on that board, right? And that's essentially exactly what this dashboard is here as well. So in my test environment here, we have a little bit of a way to go, but ultimately the game here is to make this green. I'm going to come back to that in a little moment. So ultimately, this is a platform that allows you to test your defenses against things like the most common cyber attacks that are happening all around the world, or even really specific ones as well. So if any of you have ever, I don't know, come out of a board meeting or you've received a call from your senior management team where they've been reading a newspaper about I don't know, Jaguar Land Rover or Marks and Spencers or some other attack within your industry, maybe with a competitor or a client or something, and the question is asked like, gosh, could that happen to us? How well prepared are we? And instead of kind of saying, hey, we've made some investments in technology and we work with these service providers, so we think we're okay, Validato provides really clear evidence-based data on how well prepared your setup is. So we're not saying by any means that any platforms or any security controls are not fit for purpose, but these are very complex things that need to sometimes be configured and tuned and oiled and maintained and all this kind of stuff. So the threats, as we see constantly, are changing. So Scattered Spider in April and May time, when we read about them as the threat group behind Marks and Spencers and Co-op and a whole range of Harrods as well, a whole range of other organizations. I think also, Dior and a whole lot of high fashion brand names as well. Qantas Airlines, they have changed their modus operandi slightly since that time. So the threat landscape is changing all the time, and it's up to defenders to continually update their defenses, and we help you to do that. So one of the things you could use Validato for is a generic "Are we okay?" in security. So it could be things like, we really care about ransomware. We see the costs and things like the IBM report and the media. We're reading about Marks and Spencers with a enormous cost on their heads to pay over the next year, essentially. So how resilient are we to ransomware? So I can use something like this scenario here to answer that question. Or you can use Validato. We have a library of hundreds and hundreds of threats in here. So there is a threat actor or a ransomware platform called Hellcat, if I can spell correctly. Where am I? Hellcat.
I
Thank
think
you.
this is another point to pick up on here, Ronan, which is you probably, most people on this call probably do have those meetings where it's, are we going to get Marks and Spencer or something like that, that in the way of terminology. Now, the hardest bit there is to, first of all, either prove back to your board that you are not going to be one of them and you have all the correct controls in place and they're set up in a manner which obviously would mean that you prevent these actions. But secondly, as we all know, with the way the economy is and things, budgets are always shrinking, right? But the attackers are always getting, they're always gaining money in effect, right? So they're always getting more and more sophisticated. They're changing the way that they act. So by running one of these attacks, you could effectively show your board firsthand how successful or not successful it's going to be. And then, part of that being that as we live in the world of security, you're always trying to prevent you being the person held to account, right? So you can go out, do these, simulate these attacks, and effectively find the A, B, and C of where you're going to succeed, and maybe the X, Y, and Z as to where you fail. And then, from there, you've got empirical evidence to build those budgetary campaigns, right? To go out and ask your board for X, Y, Z, or ultimately prove to them that it's their risk if they're willing to take it.
Absolutely, Jake. And so what I want to focus on, and firstly, to achieve that, you don't need to bring in crazy, complex and expensive external resources. You can do this yourself. So if I wanted to run like that top 10 ransomware threat scenarios, so this amalgamates the top current 10 ransomware threat actors, which would probably be in excess of 80% of all ransomware attacks right now. What I'm going to do right now is show you how simple this is, and then I'm going to go back and show you what we just did, if that makes sense. So all you have to do is click on Run, and then select an environment. So I want to run this maybe in my Windows 11 environment, because I've just deployed this to my users. And I can log in and out of Validato with different personas of different users. So right now, it's actually telling me I'm logged in as somebody from our finance team. So maybe somebody in accounts payable who might be, dealing with a lot of invoices, like opening PDFs all the time. So can that team take our company down if they got hit by ransomware? And so literally that is all you need to do. And what it's going to go off and do right now is it is going to go off and mimic what the top 10 ransomware groups are doing inside a Windows and a Linux and a Mac environment. And it's going to show me a mapping of how that works. So um, I'll let that run, but these take about an hour to 2 hours to run. So basically way quicker than a physical test. And here's one that I did a bit earlier, like a good TV cooking show. So this is the result of a ransomware simulation that we ran on Validato in the same scenario, essentially the same Windows 11 environment, and with my finance user persona. So I can, by the way, run the top 10 ransomware test in my Windows 11 environment, but I can log in as an IT person, a senior executive, a low, high-level privileged person, and see what the results look like. And ultimately, what we're trying to do here is to find where are we exposed to threats, and where does our risk lay, and in other words, where should we focus our cyber defense efforts? And what this very clearly shows us is that there is one core area here in this execution phase where we have a big deficiency, a big gap in our defenses. And for those of you that have heard of a thing called MITRE ATT&CK, Validato is basically entirely based on this thing called MITRE ATT&CK. So this table that we're looking at here is it's essentially an academic mapping of all cyber attack behaviors from how they get in all the way through to how do they turn your defenses off or gain privilege or move across the organization, gain control of your environment, maybe exfiltrate your data, maybe fry your motherboards or encrypt your systems and all these kind of things. So while we see some yellow and reds on this right-hand side of this table here, I'm less concerned about them because these are processes that follow a very similar pattern usually. So if this is ransomware from the outside in, they typically have to gain some kind of initial access. Then they want to execute their malware and gain persistence. So what we actually want to do is we want to turn these green by restricting or hardening, either by configuring Windows or by using tools to do that for us. So it could be some endpoint security tools, or it could be you actually creating policies in Windows. So right now, it's telling me that PowerShell and Visual Basic are essentially the bad boys of, they're letting the side down here, essentially. It means that an adversary, if they gained initial access, could use PowerShell. So some of you on the call today who may well be from IT functions will go, well, we use PowerShell a lot. We're a Microsoft house. It's a super useful automation process for updating systems and so on. But it's also used by 70% of threat actors to execute malware. So very useful for the business, very dangerous also from a security perspective. And so what we have just done, as I'm just going to fly into this PowerShell result here, we actually ran a bunch of tests. These are quite technical attack simulation tests that try and mimic the exploitation of PowerShell. So if you note that we're not talking about vulnerabilities and out-of-date patches in your systems, we're assuming we're already in, and we want to basically invoke PowerShell to take over your environment, to execute my malware, to create some automated processes that you probably won't detect and you probably won't stop. So these, for instance, one of these tests here is I'm going to dump credentials using a tool called Mimikatz. It's a very technical thing. And when you consider that this user here that we're testing is somebody from a business function like finance, you can maybe start to think, well, hang on a second, why is there somebody in finance using a thing called Mimikatz and PowerShell to dump credentials? That's really not part of the typical job description. And we can see here how our controls have fared. So in this case, our controls blocked that attempt, but we didn't detect it. Whereas this one down here, which was where we're bypassing proxies, it was not blocked by our controls, but we did see it. So ultimately, we want to probably detect and block as much as possible. And to do that, we give you all the information that you need to do this for free. And you can use external help to help you to do this as well. So if there are services-based organizations here, there's a lot of services work that this platform can help to feed also. But in here is a bit of an explanation as to why PowerShell is exploited by criminality and cyber criminals. And then down here, what you can do to actually fix the problem. So this is basically suggesting that we restrict PowerShell for this user group, this finance user group. And this is how to do it safely without sort of killing the business. So if you follow that procedure, the next time you run that threat scenario, I can rerun this now, and that should then become green. And we're going to disrupt a fairly major part of the attack chain in that case. And I can compare my results over time and see, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? And P, by the way, stands for protection or protect. If you're into your NIST cybersecurity framework compliance reporting. And D stands for detection. So we're looking okay. And for those of you who are in regulated organizations, or maybe you are the prime contractor, or you have subcontractors who need to adhere to certain standards like ISO 27001 or NIST 853 or so on. Cybit works with other tools like 6-clicks, for instance, around GRC and compliance management. And we can help that process by exporting our test results and mapping them to things like ISO 27001 or NIST 853. Or if you work in the public sector or for public sector organizations, the rapidly deploying CAF framework from the NCSC is a very common one also, or will be more and more common. So ultimately, we want to disrupt attack chains by turning these green. So what this essentially means in plain English, or what the academics at MITRE, which is a sort of non-governmental organization, are trying to say, is that if this is green, so if Windows management instrumentation is green, it means that the adversary cannot use that function to execute their malware. So they are now probably going to use PowerShell. In the wild, they've been observed to use PowerShell and Visual Basic. So we've just blocked off PowerShell. So the only thing available to them now is Visual Basic. So if we do the same thing for Visual Basic, we probably are going to be in a really resilient position. So we've got green in all the early stages of an attack. And if I was minded, really like a perfectionist, I could actually start going to the latter stages of this attack lifecycle and starting to harden some of these things also. Um, but I can be pretty confident that if it's a digital outside-in attack, we're going to prevent this attack. Um, what I want to also talk about is you can look at something like I would just mention Hellcat earlier on, which is another strain of ransomware. And if I look at what this looks like in terms of MITRE attack techniques, so of these techniques that we were looking at, um, we can start to see some commonalities. So the one that I just showed you the results of that were in green and yellow and reds was the top 10 ransomware threat actors together. Hellcat is a fairly new ransomware threat actor, but what you can see if you just look at the execution phase here is that, oh wow, they're using very similar things like PowerShell. We've already just looked at that. Windows Command Shell was also one of those ones in the top 10, but there are, maybe there's some other ones here. But the key thing is that if we ran Hellcat, it's like we just read about it, run this scenario. If we had run those top MITRE techniques, top ransomware technique scenarios, and fixed the problems that were red and yellow, um, we can be pretty much 70, 80% protected against emerging threats like Hellcat as well. And the ones that we didn't handle, we can fix here also. So I think I have, by the way, one of those here. So here's Hellcat ransomware in my environment here. And I ran this a couple of days ago. And while it's not as impressive as the one we saw earlier, again, PowerShell is the major culprit. And I would be pretty confident in saying that if we turn that execution phase green, the adversary has got to find one of these other methods and techniques to exploit. And if they were a nation state threat actor, they probably would do that. If they're just a ransomware commercially orientated group, they may well just give up and find another target that's an easier, softer target to exploit. Um, and then you can fix these other things probably quite quickly and quite easily. And there are remediation instructions for all of these, by the way. So this particular one here is masquerading file types, probably something that nobody in finance should ever be doing. So probably you should be blocking it. And there's a whole lot of information here about how you can do that within a Windows environment to fix and prevent. So what I want to impress on you is that if you look at cyber defense from a threat actor behavior perspective, what we can start to see is that there is a common pattern across different threats. So this is another threat scenario. This is one actually that MITRE publish, and it changes every year, but these are the most commonly exploited Windows and Linux functions by adversaries. And if you just look at some of these things, one, they're quite common Windows functions, so like scheduled task, for instance. But if you can see here, scheduled task is used in multiple attack phases. So is there an opportunity to restrict that for people who never use scheduled task, or if they want to use it for, you need them to use it to update processes on a timed basis during the week, open it up at those times, but restrict it at other times. And there are off-the-shelf tools that can enable us to do that. But I'm looking at it again, the most commonly exploited techniques also include PowerShell, Windows Command Shell, Visual Basic, scheduled task. So these are the things that we would stress that you should use this kind of tool to see how is your Windows environment configured. Are you exposed? Because these are really simple things to fix. And then keep testing and keep raising your resilience to attacks. And once you fix these things, they're not like vulnerabilities where you scan next month or next quarter and you have another huge to-do list of things to fix. If you restrict PowerShell or schedule task or something, that is going to be restricted forevermore. But there are other things like God, we read all the time about things like RDP ports. These remote access to your environment that you know organizations quite often enable for things like third parties or consultants on the weekend to access the environment to run an update or do some work. And then people invariably forget to restrict that again. So this is why when you run Validato, say on a monthly cadence or something, the top 3, top 5 threat scenarios, if there's something like an RDP port open, we're going to find that and we're going to show you that you've got a major issue in your environment that is exposing you to threats. So super simple to use, and is like a diagnostics tool. So like that thing you plug into your car to say, is my car well or not? What's wrong with it? Why can't I start it? This is what we're doing for your network and your controls.
I think this is important to highlight, Ronan. There's obviously a lot of change in the threat landscape daily as we're seeing it at this moment in time, and you know, vendors, not tarring you with this brush, but vendors obviously create services or tools to combat these threats, and usually come at quite a premium, and effectively expect them to be the thing that you buy and it saves you, right? There is no silver bullet in security as such. And more so importantly, like you showed there, quite a few of these changes are probably just config changes within, say, the Microsoft stack, within the way that your business functions, maybe some of its core applications. So to go with the empirical evidence, a very sort of low entry cost, and say, these are what I need to fix, or come to Cybit and say, look, I've just ran Validato, it's given me XYZ. Can the support team change Y? Can we send out a consultant to do ABC for us? Is there a tool that potentially could prevent 7 or 8 different attack vectors? That is the value of this. I personally have had a manual MITRE ATT&CK mapping that we did with a business. It was about 100 user size business, so on the smaller end, and it took probably over 350 hours to map this out. Their current protections against MITRE, were configs turned on, etc. So these are mammoth tasks to do yourself. And I get asked quite a lot, to do a, how should I secure myself more? How should our company spend our budget moving forward? And it's great if you have the visibility of the current spend, the current security, how it's all set up. If you as a company know how everything's been set up, and obviously, half the time that's not the case. Certain departments might buy stuff without telling central IT. Applications get purchased, you end up with shadow IT in your environment, as we call it, and it's very hard to actually gauge the reality of where a company thinks they are and map that out. So by running an attack simulation, first of all, you can limit it to what's actually important to your business. The legal sector, for example, for the past probably 10 years, it's been ransomware. All they care about is ransomware, right? Their document management gets compromised, then they're effectively worth nothing overnight. So you can set this on that scenario, and you can bring your security posture up, but in terms that actually matter to your company. I can sit here and do a webinar about the threat landscape, and we can talk about ransomware, and we can talk about these types of things, but it's a little bit similar, and it is a good metric to follow, but it's a little bit similar, in my opinion, to the Microsoft Secure Score. Your Microsoft Secure Score could be a 0, but that's because you haven't turned on any Microsoft controls, right? You might have a Cisco stack, you might have a Palo Alto stack, and you might be, as secure as if you turned on everything in your Windows, your Windows stack. And yes, I know there's the whole better together story that a lot of vendors are saying, but let's make sure that it's actually your posture that you're trying to rectify, and not just, fixing the posture of a X size UK business.
Indeed, I would probably just add to that, Jake, that something that MITRE in particular trying to promote quite heavily is the concept of threat-based defense. So, what are you trying to protect your environment against? Are you blind of just saying it's just another undefined threat actor, or as you say, if you're a law firm, and you really care about ransomware, are you best configured? Is your environment best prepared to detect and to stop that threat? And what does that threat look like? So this is what we're trying to implement here, is a really simple interpreter of those complex threat actor behaviors and the way you've configured your environment. So if they came visiting and knocked on your door tomorrow, would you be out of operation for 7, 10, 20 days, whatever, at huge cost? Or can you do something about it? And one of the other things that I hope I've impressed you today is that I've on purpose not talked very much about initial access, because the whole industry talks a lot about how did they get in? What was the thing that enabled Scattered Spider to get into Marks and Spencer's? The question that I ask all the time is, how are they able to be successful once they were in? So there are absolutely things that you can do to improve detection, but also improve protection, particularly by withdrawing technical functions to user groups that don't need access to them. And if those are the technical functions that the threat actor is going after, there's absolutely a very strong business case to restrict them. And we are a vendor, but we're providing impartial data on how you can make those restrictions at no cost. We give you all the information to do it yourself if you want to, and if you want to use other people to help you to do that, that's entirely up to you.
Perfect. So thank you, Ronan. I think as we wait for any questions to come in, if there are any, I would obviously not be doing the right thing without plugging what you should do next with your Cybit account team, if you like. So if any of you are interested in obviously exploring this further, potentially what it might look like in your environment, or an assessment as well, sort of one-time scan to see if the proof's in the pudding, then please reach out to your Cybit account manager or me. So Jake Upfield, catch me on LinkedIn, or jake.upfield@cybit.com. My details will be there when the recording for this webinar is sent out as well. And then yes, I guess Ronan, if you want to plug anything, but I will obviously liaise with Ronan, had anyone want to explore this further.
Only to say that we love working with the Cybit team, and we're very happy for anyone who might be interested to do free tests and POCs on the platform. We're very open for you to evaluate it at no risk.
Perfect. Okay. So if there aren't any further questions, I believe we can probably end the webinar. And if you do have any questions, but you don't want them in a public setting, then again, please reach out to your account manager.